You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your slightly off host. Also 343, Guilty Spark, Abraham.
I don't know what that means. I am your CGI host, Shane.
That is a very nerdy Halo reference.
Okay.
So this is episode 343, 343. And I was like, hey, 343 Guilty Spark. And hey, we're talking about a sort of semi-related, robotics type topic today. So thought I'd throw that out there. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. We don't usually just ramble at the start. I mean, we kind of do, but we're a psychology podcast and we talk about the things that people do. And sometimes we talk about the effects that things have on us. And then we give them names. Like the one that we're talking about today that I haven't quite said, and that's okay because I'm teeing it up for a cool intro full of pop culture references.
I can't wait.
But thank you for joining us today. If you are listening on the day that this is released, it is December 6th, and there's several holidays to recognize. So just quickly, let's get them out of the way. Happy National Gazpacho Day and National Miners Day.
I like it. There's also St. Nicholas Day as we're gearing up to Christmas, and it's also Put On Your Own Shoes Day. I'm tired of it.
Curious that St. Nicholas Day is all the way at this, not even in December yet, but all right, whatever. Yeah. It is National Pawnbrokers Day and World Trick Shot Day.
I like the second one of those.
Yeah.
And it's also Microwave Oven Day, which I support, but it's also Computer Science Education Week, which must have started in the 90s because I remember when computer science was a big deal when we were kids.
Big STEM fans over here.
Mm-hmm.
It is Cookie Cutter Week. Maybe both metaphorically cookie cutter as well as actual tangible cookie cutter. Who knows? And National Groundwater Awareness Week, which is very important because there's not very much of it left. It's going away rapidly and we need it to survive. So goodbye, future.
Stop drinking water is the advice that we got there, I guess. I don't know. Maybe not so much. It's also National Pear Month and it's National Root Vegetables Month. So if you like really hard things to eat, those are both good sources of
could blend those two things together.
Yeah. Pear potatoes.
Potato and strawberry. It is Universal Human Rights Month. Love like that. And keep that one going all of the time. And AIDS Awareness Month, which is also very important. So good on that.
Absolutely.
All right. But we just like to list those holidays. Make sure that, everybody knows that we see you. We recognize you, celebrate all of those or any of those in whatever way you see fit. Let's jump into our topic today because it's a fun one. I'm going to start with a nice pop culture reference for any of you out there who have been blessed enough to have seen all the Twilight movies, and one of them, Bella, I think is the main character's name. I'm giving myself away on my familiarity with this series already. She gives birth to this baby, and upon first look, audiences just recoiled in horror at the distressing and menacing child, even creepier than any Chucky doll or Exorcist child or Rosemary's Baby, just revolting to audiences everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So this was a CGI baby at the time that CGI just was not up to the task of making realistic looking humans. However, when baby Jack Jack shows up on the screen in The Incredibles with his disproportionately large eyes, cartoonishly round face, and almost plastic looking skin, most people were perfectly okay with this and may have even found him cute. I think he's adorable.
Yeah, Jack Jack is great. Okay, so all of that is to say, most of you will have heard of the Uncanny Valley hypothesis, or UVH, as it's sometimes referred to in the literature. But what is it? Why is it? Why is it called the Uncanny Valley? Why does everyone know how it makes them feel, but can't explain why? So we're going to try and do our best to unpack the Uncanny Valley today.
I always like these episodes that are like this, like very complicated experience that people have, but nobody can explain why. Like the Call to the Void episode that we did. I always think it's really fascinating.
Yeah. It is kind of a weird thing. And I think we have, a decent. We're going to discuss several hypotheses that some have more merit than others, and we'll also unpack some of our own. But you're right that no one actually has a clear understanding of what's going on here. But there's also there's some room for debate in here that we will get to. But I would like to just say really quickly, if you like the show, if you'd like to support us, join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, subscribe, leave a rating and review, say something nice on YouTube just to throw the world into utter and complete chaos from what usually happens on YouTube. And those are all the different ways that you can support us. Otherwise, let's go ahead and dive into our topic.
So the concept was first introduced by Masahiro Mori, a Japanese roboticist and professor born on August 31st, 1927 in Japan. And Mori's research focused on robotics, human-robot interaction, and the psychological aspects of robot design, which I think is super fascinating. Like, I feel like we kind of talked about this before, like around this time and a little bit after, there was this obsession with like sci-fi and, but like hard science fiction, like Isaac Asimov stuff.
Yeah.
So this is like the time for this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably a very large wormhole, possibly full discussion to go into, like what do research or scientists, these engineers, mechanical engineers, computer engineers, the people who are making robots, what kind of factors do they consider in terms of the psychological interaction with robots? I think that'd be a potentially cool discussion, way off the beaten path for where our area of expertise lies, but that's never stopped us before. So
no, never.
So maybe we'll take that on. Anyway, Mori held a bachelor's degree in engineering from the University of Tokyo and a doctorate in philosophy from the Tokyo Institute of Technology. So he had his laurels. He knew what he was talking about. He was an expert as far as that was concerned. In terms of roboticists, robotics, not roboticists. Maybe he wasn't a roboticist, but definitely robotics.
Right.
And thought a lot about these things.
Right. And so before people had any idea that computer-generated images could make their skin crawl, there was a much more pressing source of weirdness, and that was robots. I think that there's probably a really interesting history of robots and what that looks like too, that we probably need to unpack at some point. But
yeah, I mean, honestly, because they predate a lot of what we normally would think of as when the age of robots probably started. People have been making mechanical devices that do work for them for a very long time. Very long time.
Yes.
But that would be a fun one probably to dig into, and that maybe ties directly into that whole side tangent about the psychological aspects of our interactions with robots. But all right, well, so Mori here, this roboticist, he's putzing around the lab, he's trying to figure out what makes robots and people tick simultaneously, and he was kind of speculating on the future of robotics, and he coined this term Uncanny Valley in 1970. He did this in an essay published in the journal Energy. This journal was, I believe, it was like a Japanese technology type of journal. And he envisioned our acceptance of robots on a comparative scale in which he sort of looked at as robots become more and more human-like, people like them more and more until they cross this threshold into very human-like, but not quite realistic.
Yeah. So not quite Blade Runner, y'all. So we haven't gotten there yet.
Exactly.
Now, in 2005, all the way back then, we were fresh out of high school, trying to figure out where we were going to college, maybe going to college. I was planning to be a dad at that point in time. McDorman and Takashi Minato translated Mori's original paper into English. That increased the concept popularity throughout the literature. So, like, basically, once it was translated, more people found interest in this because it was able to get out to a wider audience.
Yeah, it was reaching a lot more people who are doing work in a similar area, who are thinking about these things, who are writing about these things, who are building these things. And so anyway, in his essay, in this description of what he did, where he was doing this comparison of as humans become more human-like, people like them more, he sort of plotted this hypothesis on a graph. So you can imagine the y-axis, which is the vertical one, he has labeled as affinity, and this just means preference for something. On the x-axis, he has human likeness. And so essentially, you're sort of drawing a line. This line goes up as it becomes more human-like, the line increases, the affinity increases, meaning that as it becomes more human-like, people like it more and more, right? However, it reaches this point that we were describing, at which the human likeness becomes very close, but not quite right, and it starts to become eerie, and there's the sudden and immediate dip in the sort of emotional response when encountering humanoid robots or computer-generated characters, or even like behavior and actions from artificial sources that are close to human, but not quite realistic enough. And so you see essentially it plummets down so far, it basically plummets past baseline.
It goes from like, oh, toy robots are cool to very clearly, I hate robots. Like that's essentially what this graph looks like. But then it kind of picks back up and it goes up to this thing called a bunraku puppet, which I don't know what that is. And I'm looking it up right now.
Okay.
It looks like something that's used in Japanese puppet theater. And the ones that are all on here are painted as geishas. It looks like kind of like an art.
Okay.
They're very likable. Like it's a puppet that's likable. It's not like a ventriloquist dummy, which would fall below that likable, you know.
Yeah.
No thanks.
Or Slappy on this.
Yeah, no slappy. When you that, I love the Goosebumps references on here. But then it ends, the top of the graph is a healthy person. So people apparently really like healthy people. I think that he underestimates how much people dislike other people. Now, as Abraham mentioned, the drop is significant. It's so significant that it passes down through the neutral baseline feeling that we might have toward a simple robot, such as a timer, all the way to causing emotional distress in the viewer. So it kind of goes like, I don't like this. This is really bad. And then it starts picking back up.
Yep.
But if the human likeness kind of increases to indistinguishable from humans, the affinity increases again to maximum levels. So basically there's this weird period where it's like, it doesn't quite look human. There's something off, something weird about it, and it makes me uneasy.
Yeah. So the reason it's called the Uncanny Valley is just because on the graph, it's like sloping upwards and then all of a sudden dips down really far and then comes back up again toward the end when it reaches like indistinguishable from humans level. And it looks like a valley, like just on the graph, the imaginary hypothetical graph, it kind of looks like a valley because it's sort of carved out this deep dip in the middle of what was otherwise a sloping surface.
Right.
That's just where it comes from. So yeah, sorry listeners, you can't see it. If you join us on Patreon, we do post these things there, but that's if you Google it, you'll also find it there.
Yeah.
That's basically what's going on here. And so like a Roomba, if you will, is a robot that has very little human likeness, almost none. But a humanoid tiny toy robot has much more human likeness. And if it's still fairly cartoonish and somewhat distinguished from humans, we like it a lot. And an animatronic robot has even more likeness to the point that they are often seen as creepy. As a matter of fact, anything with a high human-like appearance to that level can be subject to this uncanny valley effect. But the most examples are things like androids, computer game characters, lifelike dolls, and those creepy animatronics at like a Chuck E. Cheese or Five Nights at Freddy's. Still gives us nightmares. Yeah. That's where it is. That's where the threshold meets the uncanny valley, if you will.
There's nothing creepier than Charles Entertainment Cheese. Such a strange thing. What a weird cultural phenomenon. So to be clear, the Uncanny Valley was not something he experimentally validated or tested, in which he collected real responses and reactions to uncanny imagery, but more of a philosophical thought experiment as a consideration for future roboticists that they should be aware of as they start to develop robots and kind of move towards more advancements in that field.
Now, initially, as we said, there was relatively little reaction or response to Maury's ideas in this essay that he published. However, this was fairly early on. There really wasn't a huge boom and bust going, or not bust, but a huge boom going on in robots or anything AI related. But as technology began to improve, as it was translated into other languages, Maury's concept of the uncanny valley started to have a much more significant, widespread response and recognition, and have a significant impact on fields such as robotics, computer animation, and the human-computer interactions and interfaces that we sort of commonly engage with now today.
Yeah, the amount of robotics that are involved in our life today is kind of absurd when we think about it. And part of the reason why we are so comfortable with it is because most of the experiences are fairly human-like. I mean, think about if Siri's voice was more robotic, like maybe Max Headroom, or when you start thinking about some of the text-to-talk voices that are very stilted and the tone is all off, like it's very uncomfortable or weird, but Siri can actually have a conversation with you in what seems like a fairly consistent affect. And I think that's where it makes it so that we're more likely to interact with it.
Yeah, it's more human even than Ron DeSantis.
It even smiles better. And Siri doesn't wear heels as far as we know.
as far as we know. We will eventually have to bow to our AI overlords, but in the meantime, we'll say all hail advertisers.
All hail the advertisers. All hail the advertisers. All hail the advertisers.
Okay, well, we hailed them. So now we can talk about sort of why, or maybe the how is a better way to phrase this. What's going on with the uncanny valley? Why does it work? How does it work? Blah, 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 blah.
So it almost seems counterintuitive that as something becomes more humanoid, that we will suddenly find it disturbing when grotesquely disproportionate representations of humanoids, such as animated cartoon characters, are charming to the point of being lovable, right? So we see these cartoon characters, we really like them. They are really ridiculous. They're very exaggerated. But as something like technology in the real world starts to advance, it gets really uncomfortable. This despite clearly wildly inaccurate depictions of what ears, eyes, mouths, and noses should look like, or impossibly large arms or impossibly slender waists. we tend to have an affection or an affinity, as we've been talking about, to these cartoon characters. So what is it about that point at which things go from lovable to unsettling? Popeye should be unsettling.
It should be very unsettling. Those forearms would be a medical emergency.
Yes.
So why does this happen? It's really not entirely certain, as we mentioned, but there are a few suggestions from psychologists and other armchair experts that we'll give some platform time to for the moment. Let's talk through some of the hypotheses, suggestions. They call them theories, but a theory is based on data, and these are based on speculation. So I like to call them hypotheses or suggestions for why we get that unsettling feeling.
Right. So one of these hypotheses is that there is an implicit fear of being replaced by robots or AI as they become more human-like and difficult to distinguish from real humans. And essentially, what we fear is as they get closer to that, they're going to take over, right? They're more likely and more capable of taking over as they get more advanced.
Yeah, they appear more capable of doing this. Now, okay, so let's focus on this idea for a second, that the reason we're creeped out is that we implicitly fear the takeover of robots. Okay. This replacement idea doesn't exactly jive with the uncanny valley, because if this were the case, then we should expect people to start out with the highest possible affinity for things that are the least human-like, right? And then to like them less and less as their human likeness increases, essentially. This is not to say that this theory is incorrect, just to say that it's inconsistent with the idea of the uncanny valley. So it doesn't make very much sense logically as a reason for the uncanny valley. Like it would kind of make sense for an opposite hypothesis as the uncanny valley.
Right. Like it should start with, we love Roombas and we hate any robots with arms. And as it gets, as you get kind of further along, we start to hate it less. But that's not really what happens, because we love toy robots. I have a whole toy robot collection behind me.
That's right.
It also assumes that humans are the pinnacle of achievement, which we're not. And therefore, the thing that is most like us is the most threatening. So we certainly do bend nature to our agendas more substantially than any other creature. We've kind of established that, but our physical form is not likely the reason for our success. So I'm going to go ahead and disagree with this idea, this hypothesis. It also assumes robots would want to take over and replace humans, which, without spending a lot of time on this implication, seems a bit premature to be concerned about. They're nowhere near that level.
And don't know that they would ever care. Right. I don't know why they would see us as a source of competition that they would worry about.
We would have to program them to care.
Yeah, I think they would largely ignore us and just kind of do whatever it is they do.
Right.
Anyway, let's move on to another suggestion. So we sort of unpacked that one for what it's worth. Maybe it's right. Just I don't think it makes a lot of sense to me. Another suggestion states that these human-like representations are inconsistent in the ways that matter to how we perceive them. Their movements are not governed by the muscle and skin and nerves that underlie our own physiology. They may express little or no emotion in their movements or their communication. Their sound may be mismatched from their facial reproduction of those sounds. So their sort of lips move and different sounds come out than what the lips movements should be.
Sure.
Because they're probably coming out of something more like a speaker than out of vocal cords. They may be delayed in their reactions in a way that feels a little strange to us. Essentially, what people expect from something human-like starts to violate that expectation, and then therefore comes across as disturbing. So that's sort of this other hypothesis here.
I could see, just from an anecdotal standpoint, the experience of, if I'm talking to somebody and there's a 2-second delay whenever they're having a conversation with me, how that would be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or if I have an expectation of what your voice sounds like, or if you're looking at me and you expect my voice to sound a certain way, but they sound like Kermit the Frog, you're going to have a different experience with what that looks like, or how you respond to me. So I understand that subverting an expectation thing.
Yeah.
But, again, it's just kind of a thought here.
Might be also sort of weird, jerky, muscly movements that just don't look like something a normal human would do.
Yeah.
Because they're sort of mechanical and not human. That would also be a little unsettling.
Is that why people are uncomfortable with Michael Jackson when he dances? It's a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough.
Another hypothesis, or another theory, called configural processing, which sounds so very cognitive psychology.
It sure does. That's cognitive psychology brand theory naming right there.
Oh, yeah, 100%. That's what you learn in your first cognitive psychology class. 101, branding. It's a terminology we use. There's also a related hypothesis called perceptual mismatch, and these suggest that the positioning and size of human features, such as where the eyes are in relation to the nose, or comparison between realistic and unrealistic features, such as realistic skin with synthetic appearing eyes, actually creates an ambiguous incongruity that makes us uncomfortable. So if you've read the second Dune, the Duncan Idaho Gola, who has steel eyes, probably very uncomfortable.
That would be uncomfortable for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Also because he's basically reincarnated from the dead.
Yeah. He's a Frankenstein with steel eyes.
Yeah, we didn't mention this when talking about the Uncanny Valley, but some graphics give a few more heuristics along the curve to sort of give a depiction of like what is very unsettling to people. And usually at the bottommost level of the uncanny is zombies.
Ugh.
I actually am not sure I would put them there because I feel like they don't create the same unsettling feeling that like really bad CGI characters create.
No, they don't make me go, oh, that's weird. They make me go, huh! And run.
Exactly. Yeah, they're different kinds of fear, you know?
Yeah.
Some psychologists have posited that we experience cognitive dissonance when we encounter these human-like creations because we don't know how to behave toward them as humans. We don't know how to behave toward them as robots. Do we behave toward them as animals, as aliens, as something else? We don't really know. We don't have a frame of reference for what we're supposed to do in terms of like, I see this thing and I know it's not human, even if it looks very human. I'm sort of like, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here.
Yeah.
And I think in a way that's not an unreasonable suggestion. I think there's actually some overlap with what I would take, you know, embracing what I understand about the philosophy of human behavior. I would have a somewhat similar orientation to a hypothesis about what's going on in the situation to what they're suggesting here.
Sure, because it's kind of a novel stimulus that you don't really have any learning history with. So like all of a sudden you're like, what do I do? And because you have no learning history, it's by itself kind of unpredictable. So as a result, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ease into this. I'm going to talk this robot like it's trying to kill me, and then we'll figure out what's going on there. Not that the robot's trying to kill you. Now, I do appreciate our evolutionary oriented folks. I always love hearing from this side of the coin.
Sure.
I think they have some cool ideas. They have suggested that we have evolved to see these kinds of distorted features as signs of illness or contagious disease, which we find naturally repulsive. Their words, okay, but that's not. This is maybe one of the ones I don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah,
I don't really like. But still, others in the same camp suggest that disturbing appearances may indicate more characteristics for mating, which turns us off if things are off or uncomfortable. Or perhaps it's because we know implicitly that these animated things are not alive and are instead more akin to the undead and cause us to think about our own mortality. But by this logic, we should distrust all artificially animated things, not just those that are human-like. So we can't just go, oh, this is human-like and it's unalive. I don't like it. It's anything that is moving that's unalive that should make us uncomfortable.
Right.
There's really no escaping the uncanny valley in that scenario. Not that it's critically necessary, as this idea is still just an idea and not validated, as we said before. But it's just the evolutionary one, like when you specifically talked about zombies, doesn't really match up with what Maury was trying to argue.
Yeah, and also I feel like it doesn't quite match up with our actual experiences with this sort of uncanniness that comes with human-ish, but not quite right.
I feel like that argument will be made with maybe this doesn't account for things like stone carvings or paintings and stuff like that, because it has to be moving or kind of like animated. But I feel like if you saw certain statues, you'd probably be a little bit uncomfortable with how it was designed because it didn't look quite right. But for the most part, we kind of generally accept that.
That's true. Yeah. All right. A study in 2018 by David Ratajczyk.
David Ratajczyk.
There you go.
Ratajczyk.
There you go.
There you go.
It was one of those. It was somewhere in there. I said there you go like 3 times, but one of them is probably it was better than I did anyway. Anyway, this guy, I'm assuming it's a guy. This person surveyed hundreds of thousands of comments on YouTube videos.
No.
Oh my God, poor fellow. He really took one for the team on this one.
Yeah, he retired soon after and left the human experience because who would want to do that?
Man. Chills me to the bone. Anyway, so I surveyed all these YouTube comments on videos of robots and found that people were most repelled by robots based on their size as one. So small robots, people really didn't find threatening, but larger ones they did. But not necessarily their human likeness. Further, the more human-like their behavior, the more creepy people found them, citing that it made them question what it means to be human.
Oh,
yeah, I know. I guess you're watching this very human-like robot and thinking like, wait a minute, am I a robot?
I've seen a lot of weird, creepy robots. There's never been a time where I've seen a weird, creepy robot and gone, am I human?
Yeah, that's probably not what they're thinking, but I thought it was a great joke in the moment. But I think, I could see it being something like, wow, if humanity is this easy to replicate using robots, then is our humanity really that significant or important? Is maybe more along the lines of what they're experiencing.
Sure.
But let's go with the am I human thing. I think that's great. Am I a robot?
am I a robot? Like, I know, but even that, like, I don't think there's never been anything that's made me, and maybe I just don't care enough to question that, right? From a philosophical standpoint, like, I've never kind of questioned, what does it mean to be human?
Same.
And seeing a creepy robot would not make me question my own humanity. I think what makes me question humanity is like whether or not we treat others well. And for the most part, we have found that humanity is failing quite a bit. Failing so hard, in fact, that in the middle of a podcast, they'll just drop an ad and treat others so poorly with that ad.
That was an odd bit of cruelty there. I would actually, I tend to be more optimistic about humans. I would disagree. I'd say humans generally treat each other very well. What happens is that some people who treat people very badly get into power and then they divide people.
Sure.
Those people who have the megaphone, who preach fear and hatred and grievances, those are the people who I think create sort of a culture of distrust among one another. But generally, people, I think, are actually really good to each other most of the time. At the very least, they're very neutral to each other a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's neither here nor there, except that we are talking about human-like things and robots are not that. So let's move on to our next thing. We've talked about cognitive psychologists. We've talked about evolutionary psychologists. We've talked about armchair psychologists. Now let's talk about neurologists.
Yes, very different group of people. They're the how things work type of people.
Yeah, or where they work is often a question.
Yeah, where they work too.
Oh, there it is. I see it. It's there.
Yeah, just like going back to our discussion on the extended version of this video episode on our Patreon, where we talked about the hippocampus.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, some neurologists have conducted brain imaging studies that suggest that when we are interacting with robots and other AI-like things, we may be using more analytic thinking than social interaction-oriented thinking. And I think that that's a really important kind of way to look at this, that when we are interacting with something that we have recognized as either kind of mimicking a live or mimicking a living thing, then we're not looking at it from, I need to interact with this thing from a social perspective. We're going, right. What is this? Why is this happening? What does this do? Like, where does this go? Like, what is this capable of? And start kind of answering different questions about that interaction.
Not that I would recommend this. As a matter of fact, I recommend not doing this at all. I think it could cause a lot of distress for both people on either side of this interaction I'm about to propose. But if you would imagine a situation where you go to interact with some stranger and you make yourself believe that that person is actually a robot, how differently you would interact with that person versus if you thought that they were a real person who was going to go home to their family and have dinner and like has plans and a life and hobbies and things like that. But instead you might think like, no, they're just a robot. They just turn off at night and, recharge, and then they turn back on and then they're here the next time. And how different of an experience that would be. I can sort of see the rationale in why then we would feel very differently interacting with human-like things that we know aren't humans versus when we are interacting with things that we know are humans.
Even better though, think of that person as a robot, going home to their robot family and their robot kids and their robot dog, taking a robot shower, sleeping in their robot bed, and then coming to their robot work the next day, and then questioning whether or not you are in fact a robot in a robot world, and you just didn't know until just now.
That's pretty good. I like that a lot.
We're going to get so many people writing in just being like, you have ruined my life.
There was a movie or TV show not that long ago where there was some character and it was a robot and you didn't know and they didn't find out until later. It wasn't the Blade Runner movies, though that sort of fits the bill. It was something else.
Was it Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. where the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had the life model decoys, the LMDs, which were like, they didn't even know they were robots until they were like Disengaged?
That is horrible. But no, I never saw Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so I that wasn't the one I was thinking of. But that's
Okay.
fun.
It happens. They replace characters with robots, and you don't know until the character gets killed, and you're like, oh my God! And then you're like, oh no, that was an LMD. That was a life model decoy.
All right. Well, that's
horrifying.
distressing. Yeah. All right. Well, I think it is time for us to sort of unpack what I think would be, we're going to riff on this a little bit, but a behavior analytics, sort of a very behavioral framework for thinking about the uncanny valley and the extent to which it might occur, what would be an explanation for it, if you will.
So some of these kind of theories or suggestions get pretty close to what feels like a good skeptical, empirical conceptualization of the uncanny valley. And as we develop, we learn to respond to a wide and complex variety of features of people around us. So most of us have been exposed to a lot of different features and characteristics and what might be described as formal stimulus classes among humans.
Yeah.
The idea is that these are just like formal features, the look and the movement of eyes, lips, skin, general movements and mannerisms, as well as how we look and move ourselves, prepare us to engage with those features in the real world. And so we have kind of a unique learning history with what types of behaviors to expect from other humans. And further, we start to learn what not to expect from people around us. You can kind of see this too when we see behavior that is quote unquote out of the norm.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like non-normative behavior, where somebody's doing something that's kind of like not something that's expected from social etiquette. We kind of notice that right away.
Yeah.
You know, somebody walking down the street and they just drop their pants. You go, oh, okay, that's something that people don't normally do. Now I'm noticing that.
Right.
I think that's important to know kind of as our experience with engaging with other humans goes, we have kind of an expectation of what humans do.
Yeah. Like if you were to go into, I don't know, some kind of acrobatics training place and see people walking around on their hands all over the place, you'd quickly realize like, okay, that's a thing that people do in this context.
Right.
But if you were out walking around a mall and all of a sudden someone just got on their hands and started walking around, that would certainly be like catch your attention because that's not something you tend to see. And I think a lot of people think of this as this shocking revelation as like, oh, look at that person stopped and paid attention to someone walking on their hands. I'm like, yeah, nobody does that here. Like,
right.
Everyone would stop and pay attention to that because that's a thing that does not happen here.
Right.
Big surprise.
It stands out in a contextually homogenous type of behavior, right?
I love that. That was beautifully said.
When something is out of that, you go, oh, that's like if everybody's wearing red shirts and you see somebody wearing a blue shirt, you go, ah, like, because it stands out. Not because it's like weird. It's just because it stands out compared to a larger group of people.
The one person wearing a Joe Biden shirt at a Trump rally, and you can spot them very easily.
Very clearly. Yes.
Yeah.
They're the one with a book.
Yeah. They're the one without the swastika.
Yeah. Got him.
Anyway, it was just the blue versus red. That was all that got me thinking about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, still talking about this. So things that are clearly and easily distinguished from humans, even when they are cartoonishly human, they don't appear ambiguous compared to what we expect because they don't look like how we expect other things to look, right? So that's why when we see a picture or a cartoon or an AI generated image of something that doesn't really look human, it looks like some very cartoonishly disproportionate figure of a human, we can usually kind of just roll with it. It might look weird. It might look even a little unsettling in some ways, particularly if it's not disproportionate in the ways that we sort of gotten used to. Like all cartoons have these gigantic eyes, and so they might look a little different from that. But for the most part, we can look at these odd representations, and they don't look human enough for us to try and match them to what we are used to seeing as human. And I say see a lot. It doesn't have to be visual. Like this, blind people could have the experience of uncanny valleyness too, particularly with sound. Also, the sound is something that we attend to. That's part of it in the same way.
Right.
So the more features get close to the features we are used to seeing, that is, the more things blur the lines between what we're used to interacting with and what is new and different in those AI and robotics, but without exact correspondence, it would very predictably feel sort of off, right? It's the fact that those cues, the features, the movements of robots and CGI, they would affect us in similar ways to cues, features, and movements of normal interactions with people that we were around, but they do so incorrectly, ambiguously, unpredictably.
Right.
Just like we were just saying that the conversation about what stands out in a crowd or in an area where the context says the contextually homogenous behaviors that we see here, this thing is not that. Essentially, we'd have almost the same cues, like they're really close. And so there's not a lot of places where we have the lines being so closely blurred. We're like, this thing's just barely off from this thing, right?
Right.
But those new ambiguous cues would be associated with different contexts and features. It's like watching Twin Peaks, where everything just feels wrong the whole time.
Right.
I think that's the way that the set it is sort of like, it's off-putting because it's not what we expect. And expect is sort of a fuzzy, nebulous term that doesn't mean a lot, except to say that it's derived from the idea that all of our experiences prepare us to interact with certain stimulus cues in a particular way. And little kids are notoriously bad at this as they're like getting used to the world. They say and do bizarre things that are sort of like, why would you even ask someone that? What are you talking about? What are you doing? Right? Like, why are you like putting that thing in your mouth? And it's like, they don't have as many features and cues and sort of patterns that they've picked up that look like what you might call normal in a particularly homogenous context.
Right.
Homogenous context, by the way, would be like a great super nerdy album name for like
yeah. You've got a really good indie rock record or like a weird like math rock record. Like you could hear it being like a Minus the Bear offshoot.
All the members are actually scientists, and they thought that was a good idea.
That's our band now. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah, contextually homogenous. Anyway, all that is to say is just like we see examples of this in humanoid things that are not very good at the humanoid thing yet, which is kids. Arguably, they're great at it, but just like their behavior is not formed really consistent patterns yet and is not really consistently informed by its context. They're still learning. And the same is going to be true for these humanoid robot or CGI things that are like almost there, but not quite. And now with kids, we kind of expect that again. Like that's back to the part where as adults, as people who have been around long enough, we see kids doing weird things. I'm like, yep, that's what kids do. That's totally makes sense.
Sure.
And it's actually part of the reason when you see a kid who speaks like a very young child who speaks with like perfect articulation and prose and says really clever, thoughtful, insightful things. And you're like, oh, that child creeps me out. And again, it violates the norm, like what we expect from them.
Yeah.
Like, why is this precocious child reciting things to me that are more complicated than things I understand? I don't get what's going on here, and I don't like it. It's a very similar parallel that we can draw. And so I think that's where I land in terms of trying to unpack what might be going on in these situations.
And I think that's probably where I would land too, more than anything. There's always a level of discomfort when something subverts your expectation of a scenario or an interaction, right?
Yeah.
And not necessarily always bad. Like it's one of those things where, I had this expectation and now it's changing and I have a skill set to pivot towards that or away from that. Like I have the behaviors or like the knowledge or the experience to be able to handle the situation. But I think what ends up happening with the Uncanny Valley stuff is I've never seen a baby that looks like an adult. This is weird. I don't like it. Like this is like, I have no way to handle, like, what do I say to this adult baby? Like, what do I say to the parents of this adult baby? Like, I don't know what to say. Like, your baby is handsome, because I can't say cute because it's an adult baby and adult babies are not cute.
This is why everyone hated Benjamin Button.
It was weird. Let's all admit that's a weird premise for a movie.
It was a weird premise. That was not a bad movie, but
no, it was great.
Yeah, I don't think anybody hated it. Probably some people hated it, but there was that element of very weirdness, and the premise was very strange.
Somebody was very high and was like, dude, what if we were like born old?
Yes. 5 edibles later, the curious case of Benjamin Button was born.
Yeah, the script is written and it is a blockbuster.
All you have to do is cast Brad Pitt and we will make money.
That's so far that's been the case. Name one bad movie that he was in. You can't.
I will think on it. And giving me some space to think on it, we will let you think on these ads. There is no escaping the ads. But is there escaping the Uncanny Valley? Oh,
what a great lead in. I love that. So some do think that we cannot escape this Uncanny Valley. It's more like a wall. Like we can't ever get past it because there's always going to be that situation that kind of toes the line a little bit.
It reaches the point that's just like, you just can't cross it. It's like, nope, it's uncanny. It'll always be uncanny. You either go more cartoonish, pull back from the uncanny, or you just stay uncanny.
Right. And maybe I'd like to move beyond uncanny because it makes me feel weird. But there are some more recent examples that have demonstrated that maybe we have already found a way to bridge the gap. So, for example, the de-aging effects that are used in recent movies, such as Samuel L. Jackson's youthful appearance in Captain Marvel, or most of the characters in Martin Scorsese's 2019 film, The Irishman. The one thing that is kind of an uncanny valley situation in that movie is when Robert De Niro, who is de-aged, starts beating somebody up like he himself is an 80-year-old man. Like he's supposed to be 20 and he's kicking somebody like he's 80, and you're like, that doesn't match. That's weird. But the rest of it's
That's true.
Not too bad.
That's a good point.
But there are also several entirely CGI characters that most people haven't even noticed were CGI, or they just don't care. Like Guardians of the Galaxy is a really great example of this. Like I love watching Rocket Raccoon. He is he is done so well, and he doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. Like sometimes they're done with mocap. I mean, we look at Avatar and Rocket Raccoon, and sometimes they are just completely CGI. And sometimes they'll even like CGI a face onto a CGI body where the CGI body was kind of just a dummy. And usually you don't like see it for a long time. It's not doing a whole lot of like heavy lifting in terms of moving the scene around. But we often sort of just, at this point, we just accept it. And it's because it's gotten so good that we kind of don't notice it. And so it actually kind of gets to the point that escaping the uncanny valley with CGI seems to mean the fact that the images are artificial becomes essentially invisible to us. We don't even notice that it's there anymore. So it's almost not that we have an affinity for it. It's that we kind of stop noticing that it's not real is sort of how I think is what's happening with the escaping of the uncanny valley.
Yeah, I think we kind of move through it and start climbing towards that human, like the puppet, right?
Yeah.
And so we kind of get towards that. Now, in robotics, some have managed to create essentially indistinguishable robots, but they have extremely limited use, such as pitching a single line or a non-speaking movement. I mean, Disney has the Spider-Man that swings from the rope across buildings.
Wow.
It's pretty impressive. And you go, whoa. But there was one time where it didn't do well and it crashed into a wall, and it looked like if it was a human, it would have died, but it was a robot, so it did not die. But it's actually pretty great. But again, it's single use, it's acrobatics, and it's really quickly swinging from a rope across and landing somewhere else, you know?
Yeah.
But most likely, people will get used to it before the quality of the robotics becomes so good that they are indistinguishable. So like we'll kind of get to a point where we just kind of go, like we're starting to notice like the robotics itself until it eventually just becomes invisible to us like we see with CGI.
Yeah, and like Blade Runner. So there is also a point here that maybe some of you listening may have been thinking, well, wait a minute, is this even really a thing? Like I've heard people say that the uncanny valley isn't real. And so there's a little room for skepticism here. Before we step into that, I think I wasn't really sure where to put this idea, but there is one solution Maury pitched, which is to just not make robots and AI human-like. They just sort of like, the uncanny valley is a thing that's going to happen. It'll be really difficult, if not impossible, to get out of it. Let's just not even try. But this seems pretty unlikely, like an unlikely solution everyone's going to agree to. People have been trying for a long time and they're starting to succeed. So it seems like that's probably not the way that we're going to go. And so
It's funny because the more I think about it, it's like, I'm sure there's utility to a human-like robot, but from what I understand, the robots that have the most utility are the ones that are like the industrial robots, or like the ones that are doing, like the work that is too dangerous for humans to do, that don't necessarily require human limbs to do.
Yeah.
If you have a robot that's going to climb through rubble maybe in a natural disaster area, it doesn't need arms and legs. It probably needs like some way to get through, maybe tracks, like maybe like a tank or something like that. Like it needs something like that,
Yeah, honestly, skeptics have pointed to the fact that, like, just since we're talking about AI a little bit now, and we're planning on doing a deep dive on AI in the future, but skeptics have talked about the fact that we don't really need a general artificial intelligence. Like, there's so many places where we can use artificial intelligence where it's just going to do the one job we need it to do really well. And getting to it, the general intelligence is such an incredible hurdle to cross that we may not ever need to cross it also. Like we might have so many different sort of siloed versions of AI, or maybe not even siloed. They're individual. They kind of do their own thing and they maybe even talk to one another, but they don't need to be a general intelligence AI.
Right.
They just need to be really good at the one thing that they need to do. So like you said, like if their one job is to find people who are trapped under a fallen building, then like they program the AI to do that. It doesn't also need to know how to write poetry and create music, and drive a car.
Yeah, like I don't need to flip an egg.
Exactly right. Like it doesn't need to invent new dishes. All it needs to do is find people who are trapped. So why also go out of your way to try and make it capable of learning anything when you just need it to be good at the thing that it's going to be good at, when we don't even know if it's possible to make it general enough anyway. So that some have pointed to that as being like an unlikely scenario that we don't really need to worry about maybe.
Why make a screwdriver a hammer if a screwdriver works just fine?
Sure. Or make a screwdriver believe that it can be a hammer.
Yeah, I don't know if that metaphor works, but I feel like it felt good in the moment. Now, some have actually suggested that this might be generational, that as more and more people grow up with AI as a normal part of their daily interactions, robots and AI will feel less creepy to those who are more used to it. And that kind of aligns pretty well with, I think, the behavioral expectations and like kind of the framework where, you know, if it's something that we're exposed to and have a pretty decent learning history with and a lot of cues with, then it's not going to feel like it's kind of out of our normal experiences.
I can't speak for everybody, but like I don't use Siri a ton, but I use it in, periodically. I need it for things. I find it very useful when I'm driving, etc. I'll be like, hey, give this person a call or just shoot them a text, and I can do that sort of thing. But at this point, like it just feels like just a tool. Like it doesn't feel like anything that's unique or special or weird or creepy. It's just like, oh, I'm just talking to my phone because when I talk to it this way, it'll do stuff that I need it to do.
Right.
And I think that when Siri first came out, there were a lot of people playing around with all the things that Siri could or would do, and all these voice assistants that have come out since then. And it feels to me, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but it feels like for the most part, we kind of all just kind of gotten used to it. It's just a thing that's around. And like There are now children who are old enough to sort of, talk and think and do things independently, who that is a world they have always known is a world with Siri. They've never lived in a world that didn't have Siri in it.
Right.
Because it's not that new. Like that is now at least 11, 12 years old.
Right.
Like these things have been around.
There's been enough time and it's kind of been so normalized that it doesn't stand out as weird or strange or anything like that. It's kind of like, I feel like, certain cultures have that with different experiences, like where you go, okay, well, this is what a convenience store looks like, or this is how you like, in the South, you pump your own gas, or we're not from New Jersey. So like, we're used to kind of doing that. And it's just one of those things where it just becomes part of the regular routines.
Yeah. Another consideration here is that really we've been talking about these uncanny valley effects from like looking at CGI images or interacting with AI behaviors or robots or anything like that. But honestly, any disembodied animated figure is likely to feel a little weird, right? Like imagine you've got a robot hand that's just sitting on the desk in front of you. It's not attached to an arm and it looks 100% real. Like you're looking at it and be like, that is a person's hand. I'm looking at a hand right now.
Yeah.
And it's like moving around and doing things completely separate and unattached to any kind of arm. That's going to look weird. Like that's going to feel weird, right? That's creepy.
Sure.
Even though it looks so real that we would swear it belongs to a person, but it's like marching around our desk doing the things.
Yeah.
But it's actually just a robot, and like that would feel weird. So really it's any disembodied animated thing that is doing these unexpected things, going to what we were mentioning before, that I think is a reason to think that it's not really this uncanny valley so much as it is maybe something else.
Right. And kind of another point to make here is that the highly debated theory that we're talking about, this idea of quote unquote theory, a lot of people are pointing to the idea that it has the generational effects that we kind of mentioned, as well as studies that have found that varying the circumstances in which robotics or CGI are presented can significantly impact the extent to which people find it uncanny. That is to say, the factors that influence whether or not something appears uncanny in its human likeness is going to depend on its circumstances and its context.
Exactly. And therefore, those may be the features that are more important to pinpoint when we're talking about what makes something feel uncanny.
Right.
There's like a movie out right now, or it's about to come out, that's like bad CGI alligator or something like that. Have you seen the previews for this?
No.
Oh, well, they like deliberately inserted like the effects in the movie actually look pretty good. Like it looks like it was a relatively high budget movie, but they intentionally made this like horrible looking CGI alligator as the antagonist. I think that was it, something like that. And it actually looks kind of entertaining, but there's sort of like in that aspect, you might totally accept the uncanniness of the alligator that like looks like it's trying to be real, but is failing miserably at it, and think like, this is funny, this is entertaining, I am not creeped out by this. And it's because you went in with the expectation of like, I'm going to see a crappy looking alligator that doesn't look that realistic as part of this experience. And so I think, again, when I said like it's something else, what I think that something else is our relative histories with these things, what we expect from them, what we have learned from them in the past.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, it's a fairly easy concept to describe, and what we kind of look at is intuitively right. Like, when you experience it yourself, you go, yeah, that's definitely an uncanny valley situation. It's subjectively a concept that is difficult to research. Like, it is because of the nature of this type of thing, it's very difficult to research. It's very difficult to isolate. And there's just not really a lot on it because the theory, quote unquote theory itself, isn't really solid to begin with. It's kind of like, it's just an experience that people can describe, and that's about as far as it can go. Right now, at least.
I think that's actually kind of a beautiful take-home point. Is like, is this real? Kind of. Maybe not in the way that it was originally conceived of. Maybe not in the way that people think of it. It's not just like poorly generated imagery. The context is very, very critically important. The extent to which it does occur seems to have to do with what our learning history is, and our learning history both with the image or the behavior that we interact with, as well as the context in which it appears, and sort of what our expectations are going into it, which again just goes right back to whatever our learning has been around this thing.
Right.
But yeah, I think that more or less says everything there is to say about it. Is like, yeah, it is kind of an effect. We've certainly had the experience of like watching Twilight and thinking, ugh! And that was, up to and including this CGI baby that was on the screen.
Worst baby ever made.
Shots fired.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's sort of what I think about it. So yeah, I'm piggybacking on your point, I guess.
No, I think it's good. I think it makes sense. So I think if you're walking out of this episode and you're unsure of what we are still talking about, we're going to give you a couple examples of movies that were made famous for their offensive Uncanny Valley experience. The first one being the 2003 Hulk movie with Eric Bana. Phew, man, it just looks like the Hulk himself stands out so much in that movie. Yeah. It's weird.
I've actually never seen this one, but I've seen clips of it, and it definitely looks like green putty that sort of moves through the environment in a way that violates all of our expectations of physics. And it's not like the Hulk in any subsequent movies has ever like super realistic in its movements, but like they look at least okay to us. Like they did such a good job calibrating the speed and the force at which things move that we kind of just accept them. Whereas in this one, it kind of just looks like animated character flying through space at speeds that seem impossible.
Yeah, it's weird.
And just don't really jive. Yeah, it's a little weird. So another example of this was the 2019 Cats movie, which I also did not see, but the images from this are quite distressing.
It's real bad. I haven't seen it, but I've seen enough of it to know that I never want to see it.
Fair enough.
The Sonic the Hedgehog trailer, before it was fixed, before all the fans kind of blew up and were like, do not release this movie.
Yeah.
The joke in the Chip and Dale movie.
That's right, yeah.
The ugly Sonic is in that. And when you look up ugly Sonic, it is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it has like a little too human-like teeth, and like the mouth was not quite right size. Like it was a little too realistically human almost, and like had like the fur around it was just a little too like textured, and it just felt wrong looking at it. And then the redone version of it was totally acceptable. It's just
so much better
those features. Yeah. Go with the cartoon, like it's a cartoon. It's based off of a video game that was basically pixels. So your room to make for error is very large. Like have fun with making it look cartoonish.
Right, exactly.
There was also the 2010 Alice in Wonderland Tim Burton remake that had just an enormous amount of like CGI'd human faces on things. So they like took a human face and basically reconstructed it to be a CGI face on various deformed creatures that again were supposed to look pretty much like people, but were rather off-putting.
Yeah, that's no thanks. There's also the 2007 Beowulf movie, which is just real weird. No thanks.
Honestly, if you don't look at the eyes, if you don't look at the faces, the movie is visually stunning.
Don't look at the human faces in this or any of the faces in it.
The problem is they could not get any of the critical features of the face just right. Like the eyes were very glassy. The eyebrows move in a stiff, weird way. The mouth doesn't move quite right. The nose doesn't move with the mouth as it's speaking in the way that it should. So it's like they just didn't have the musculature and the pull of skin and like how light scatters off skin quite right. So if you don't look at the faces, the rest of the movie is very visually impressive. But they could not really get the faces down.
No, not at all.
The most offensive, in my opinion, I have never seen anything that was more horrifying to me in CGI history, besides maybe Twilight's baby, was the 2004 Polar Express. And actually, I take it back. The Polar Express is horrifyingly bad in its CGI effects.
Sorry to all you folks that are watching that for December right now for Christmas, because I know you're about to watch it, but just prepare yourselves. It is uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. Yes. Maybe if you have the expectation going in that it's meant to make you nauseous, then it will not be so bad. Who knows?
Yeah, agreed.
To be fair, this was 2004. Like, this was, for that time, stunning. Like, they did a very, very good job for 2004, which in 2004 was not good enough to be in a movie. And by 2023, it is alarmingly disgusting. So it is a hard to watch movie for the CGI faces and the uncanny valley effect in there.
Right.
On top of the fact that it's just incredibly boring and not that fun.
Right. I mean, and arguably, when you think about 2004, George W. Bush was elected president again. So Polar Express was not the worst thing that happened that year.
I wish I was not cough laughing through that. Great. Well, that was fun. Why don't we let the AI ads do their thing and come back with some recommendations?
Yay!
If you're joining us for the first time, again, welcome. We love that you're here. Hopefully you're still here, or else you're not hearing this. So those of you who are here, thanks. We always recommend things at the end of these episodes. We come up with things that we enjoyed over the past week, or even that we just thought up off the fly that we're like, hey, this is a thing I'd like to recommend. And then we recommend those things. But before we do that, we need to thank the important people who help make this show possible, which includes my wonderful team of people. Shane and myself do writing and fact checking. Audio engineering and production from Justin Greenhouse. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. And without my team, this podcast could not happen. It would just be me on my own making things terrible and no one would want to listen to them. And I think with my team, at least some people do. And that includes an amazing group of people who you can be on this list. If you wanted to, you could join it and it would be good and everyone would be happy. And that is the list of people who support us on Patreon. And because they support us there, we give them extra goodies because we love them so much. And that list of people includes Mike M., Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much for being amazing.
Yes. Y'all are so wonderful. We appreciate you.
I think that's what I have before we get to recommendations. Am I missing anything?
No, I think that covers it.
Groovy. All right, let's recommend some things.
Recommendations.
So, I recently got to go to Epcot. Epcot is a park at Disney. Experimental Prototype City of Tomorrow is what it stands for. That's what Epcot stands for.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So originally it was designed to be like this like live-in city that was designed by Disney. They decided to go with Celebration, which is a whole different thing. But Epcot is a theme park, and they have this really awesome ride called Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. Ooh. So it's a new ride at Disney. If at Epcot specifically, if you've been to Epcot, you know that most people go to Epcot to drink around the world. But they're trying to kind of spruce up the park, and so they added this ride. The story goes that one of the Celestials, it's Marvel, it's a Marvel thing.
Sure.
One of the Celestials essentially tries to rewind time because it basically says humans, we made a mistake with humans and we're just going to erase them, which, fair. I mean, if they were to look at today, they'd be like, yeah, okay. So, but the whole thing is that you're on a roller coaster. It's an indoor roller coaster, and you are supposed to stop the Celestial from erasing humans, and you're with the Guardians. So you're flying around with the Guardians in space, and it's great. There's like 6 songs that it plays because the big thing about Guardians is that it's so music oriented.
Yep.
We got to go on it, and the song that we got to listen to was Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World, which is a great song for a roller coaster.
Fun.
And it's not just a straight line roller coaster. The cars, they turn and they shift, like kind of like you're drifting around corners and stuff. So it's got like a different motion than a regular roller coaster. It is one of the coolest rides I have ever been on in my life. So if you like theme parks and you like stuff like that, it's definitely worth a go. So please go ride this ride because it's really, really great. And the music is fun.
Yeah, if you find yourself in Florida, we're sorry.
Yes.
You can try and alleviate that pain by checking out Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind. That's a fun recommendation.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. I'm recommending a movie. I spent all of Thanksgiving break watching movies. So many movies, just a lot of movies, which was great. I really enjoyed watching movies, so it was a perfect way for me to spend my time. One of them that I watched was this 2017 film called El Camino Christmas. This is actually a relatively stacked cast. Here we've got Dax Shepard, Tim Allen, Vincent D'Onofrio, Luke Grimes, Jessica Alba, Kurtwood Smith. There's a lot of people in this.
That's a lot of people.
And it's kind of it's sort of like a comedy crime caper, if you will, adventure action sort of thing. It largely takes place in this one setting where there's sort of a standoff, but it was fun. It was a good movie. I enjoyed it. If you're into Christmas themed action type movies, this is rated R. There's like blood and swearing and all that sort of thing. So be wary, sensitive audiences, about that sort of thing. But it was enjoyable, and it is available on Netflix. So if you're interested in something like that, then you can check out El Camino Christmas. And again, if you would like to check out a groovy new ride in Disney World in Florida, Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind.
Yeah, so fun. I love it.
All right, I think that is all that I have to say. As I said, thank you so much for recording with me today, Shane. Thank you, everybody, to who is out there listening. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. And you can learn more about this episode by going to our website. Check us out or leave us a rating and review, all that sort of thing. Is there anything I'm missing before we wrap this up? Or anything you'd like to add?
I think that covers everything that we need to today.
Cool. Go be canny or uncanny, whatever. We dig it. And you should, if you have something to say about this, you should email us. You can reach us directly, info@wwd.podcast.com, or on the social media platforms where we will interact with you. All right, cool. That's what I have. So this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.